Good morning. If you'd like to move forward, we'll start with our forum presentation shortly. We know some people are still dropping off little ones in different programs and maybe coming in shortly. It is a pleasure to have Dr. Corey Latta with us again today. He has been here before, both for Sunday morning programs and for Wednesday evening classes. Has diverse training, both theological training and ministry training, and has experience in parish ministry. He also works in mental health as a therapist, and he knows English and writing and poetry, so master of many trades. And he is also a parent, and so he is with us today to help share some wisdom for those of us who are parents, godparents, aunts and uncles, grandparents, on how we can take care of these little ones in our midst. Before he starts, let's say a prayer together from the Book of Common Prayer. Let us pray. Almighty God, Heavenly Father, you have blessed us with the joy and care of children. Give us calm strength and patient wisdom as we bring them up, that we may teach them to love whatever is just and true and good, following the example of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Welcome, Dr. Latta.
Good morning. You hear me okay? All right. Yeah, so this is a topic that I have, you could say, professional expertise in, but I'm an existential novice in the sense that I am constantly learning what it is I'm talking about. So I've got 4 kiddos, 2 sets of twins, 2 that are 8 going on 9, 2 that are 10 going on 11. I work as a private practice. I know when I say that, everyone's like, oh my God. Yeah, they're 21 months apart. It's wild. And I work a lot with families. So I do, in my private practice, I do a lot of couples and a lot of family system stuff. So it's something, this topic is something I care a lot about, and something that I'm constantly sort of workshopping, in my own life. So I think the official title's True Self, Parenting from the True Self. So first I want to talk about what I mean by true self, false self. There's an assumption in everything I'm going to share, and here's one assumption, a few assumptions, but the first one is this. We come into the world, so let's establish kind of what we mean by true self. We come into the world, and as your kids do, imagine life being the stage, and you kind of come into the world just kind of like, ta-da, and there's a sense of being unashamed, right? If you've got kids or, have young kids or had young kids, you can remember when they were 2 or 3, the beautiful sort of unashamedness of them. One of my kids would run through the house naked holding a sword, and it'd just be like, it's just normal. You know what I mean? There's just no sense. But then trauma occurs, emotional disconnection occurs, bullying occurs. You sort of fall inevitably into a family role. Are you guys familiar with, I could get on so many little, asides here, but family roles, hero child, lost child, scapegoat child. I don't know if you... It's really fascinating. I could do a whole talk on this. But inevitably, you fall into one of these roles. And where you sort of came into the world like this, through harshness and criticism and disconnection and moments of shame, you just kind of, as a kid, start to shrink, and you realize I've got to kind of fit into the cracks, right, of my family system. That inevitably leads to what we would call the false self. And the false self, it's not insidious, it's not evil or malicious or anything. It's simply provisional, and it's performative. The false self is what your child, what you, unconsciously, by the way, thinks you have to be to get by in your family system. So we come into the world like this, true self. We sort of lose relationship with that true self and put on a mask, and then we grow up and have kids of our own. And no one ever really tells us what it means to reconnect to our true self when we in turn have kids. So the place from which we parent oftentimes, as badly as we want to do it differently or do it better or do it more authentically, is partly our false self. So to parent from the true self, the first thing we have to do is connect to the true self. I don't know if anyone is familiar with ACA. It's a recovery program, much like AA or NA or OA, except ACA gets at the root cause. So it's Adult Children of Alcoholics. I'm a member of ACA, but my parents never touched a drop. So ACA fits me very well. I think if you're born of woman, you need to be in ACA. Adult Children of Alcoholics and dysfunctional families. Okay, now ACA is all about inner child work and parenting oneself. So when I say true, I'm mentioning that because when I say true self, I'm going to kind of correlate it to the inner child. And here's a principle of psychodynamic theory, and it's a principle of ACA. You have within yourself at all times an inner child. Your inner child is, and if I were to say, think about little you, innocent, loving, receptive, open, imaginative little you, what age comes to mind? And I'm really asking, like, what age? Throw it out there. 4. Anybody else? Sometimes you don't know. If you sit with it long enough, I guarantee an age will come. A lot of people say 8. For me, it's 8. I don't know why 8. Whatever age pops up, if you did work around that, there's something about that age and what was going on in your life that you're sort of wanting to connect to or need to connect to. But 4, 6, 8. It's rarely ever, interestingly enough, it's rarely ever double digits. When I ask this question, it's almost always single digits. So, below 10. Inner child is that 4-year-old you, 8-year-old you, 6-year-old you, that knew nothing but love, grace, imagination, again, that unashamedness, a propensity to play, just good, right? Part of what ACA talks about, and I think it's a really core tenet in psychodynamic therapy, is to reconnect to that true self. That little you is always with you. You don't ever lose that little you. Now, the question is, do you maintain relationship with that little you? Have you so matured that you have kind of hidden that little you? Much of the work of, to me, very good therapy, what makes like okay therapy from like good therapy, what marks good therapy, is the work to reconnect to that inner child so that that little Corey, in my case, is present all the time. So here's a way you would kind of, because here's a second assumption. So the first assumption is you come into the world as a true self and then your family system. Let me say a word about this too. All right, so when I talk about your parenting, the way you were raised, there's something in ACA called a blameless inventory. This is important. A lot of people will kind of get defensive when we start talking about your parents. Like, I had a really good mom. I had a really good, they tried their best. Yes, understand. They also didn't know what they were doing, right? They also were operating unconsciously themselves. And while they may have been wonderful people, God-loving people, moral people, my parents were, they still had their own trauma. They still had areas of their life they were blind to. We're not talking about them being bad parents or good parents. We're talking really about them being connected parents or disconnected parents. And I've never met a person who had a childhood that was fully connected. It just doesn't, I don't think it really happens, right? So the question is, can we get at the ways in which you experience disconnection and understand how that disconnection that you experience produced a false self? Let me give you I've shared the story a million times. And it could be something as innocent as this. I was doing a training once, and this lady, I don't know, she may have been early 30s. Young family, young baby. She was literally coming to do this training I was going to be a part of. And she had done enough work on herself where she realized something was off. She had a good relationship with her dad. She called her dad. She said, "Dad, that day, can we grab coffee?" So they grabbed coffee. And she said, "Dad," and she was highly ambitious and just a killer. I mean, like she 4.0, full ride to college, soccer scholarship, all this stuff. She said, Dad, can we coffee? He said, yeah. And they sit down, they're chit-chatting, and she said, Dad, do you remember all those years when I played soccer? I would get on the field, and I would sort of freeze. I sort of wouldn't move. And you would, from the sideline, go, Katie, move, do something. And as soon as you did, Dad, I'd spring into action. And he sort of chuckled like, yeah, I remember that. I don't know what it was. Like you would just kind of freeze. And as soon as I spoke up, like you would. And then she said, Dad, I know this is not what you meant, but I got to tell you, I went my whole life thinking that if I didn't move and do something, I did not have your approval. I did not have a relationship with you. He just burst into tears. He's like, it's not what I intended, right? So this is a good man who parented as best he knew how and had no idea the ways in which he was parenting was producing in her a false self, a self that felt like it had to perform to get by. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about true self, false self. Okay, so true self has to reconnect to the inner child because the inner child has not yet bought in to performance, to achieve worth, or hiding, or body image, self-conscious, all these things. That's all false self stuff. True self has not bought into that. So can you connect to your true self in all your endeavors? Another assumption is, as adults, we're not very good to ourselves often. Like adult Corey, 40-year-old something Corey, will, I'll be 45 in April. I am just as bad to myself now as I've always been in these ways. I'll overcommit. Just codependently, people-pleasingly say, yeah, I can do that, when I just shouldn't, right? And it always puts me in a bad spot. I will always suffer for that. I still have a tendency to maybe, open up too much, get into a relationship that's not always the best for me, even if I know better. Allow people to kind of blow past my boundaries. All these things I don't treat myself well in. Every one of these occasions, I am not connected to and being mindful of my inner child. The dynamic changes, and we're going to take a turn here to talk about your parenting. The dynamic changes when I, as an adult, ask one simple question. Where's little Corey in this? Where's little Corey? And if I can't, so I've usually it's in my car. I've got a backpack, laptops and book and all this stuff. And in that backpack, I have this little stuffed animal otter that I keep with me. And when I'm working with clients, I'll sort of pop it out. The otter represents inner child, represents little Corey. Oftentimes, we kind of need this tangible thing to represent our little self. So if I had it with me right now, I would say, okay, as I'm here with you, is little Corey present? Am I being good to him? Am I actually honoring him and what he needs in this relationship, in this thing I'm saying yes to, in this job dynamic, right? In this situation? Or am I sort of tucking him away as I have for so many years and so many opportunities, so many occasions, and am I operating out of my adult self that just piles on more and more responsibility, or more and more stress, or feels like he's got to perform more and more and more? So we want to connect to the inner child, and from that place, being considerate of what's good for your little self that you are never, you're disconnected from, but you're never absent of. Okay, from that place, can you parent? Now, here's what's so difficult about parenting when it comes, and I just gave you the most. This inner child work is profoundly deep. I mean, there's a lot of power in it. So that was like you're skimming the surface here. Here's what makes parenting so challenging when it comes to true self. Parenting is the one relationship. There are two relationships in your life that will most reveal your childhood trauma and your childhood complexes, and will most present your next step in spiritual evolution, okay? If you want to know what class you're enrolled in terms of your spiritual, emotional growth, look at your spouse and look at your kids. This is a bit of an aside. It is amazing to me. It never ceases to be interesting and perplexing and challenging that we inevitably marry our mom, our dad, or some sort of hybrid of the two. Your romantic relationship is a retaking of the class that you feel, oftentimes at an unconscious level, you did not pass as a child. You will always find yourself in a very familiar battle, pattern, lesson, whatever you want to call it, in your primary romantic relationship that you first started struggling with when you were a kid. It's inevitable. It's just, there's no exception to it. Doesn't have to be perfectly, I married my dad or you're my mom, but it could be some sort of amalgamation, okay? So your romantic relationship. The second thing is your parenting relationship. If you want to know, I think, what God has for you in terms of growth, look at how you're parenting your kids. Like this is going to become, if you're open to it, the next great lesson for you in terms of your own spiritual growth. And what makes this so fascinating or so difficult is sort of think about this. So the ways in which we were properly formed and malformed were in our parenting experience, how we were parented. Right? I mean, that's it. I mean, that's the kiln in which we were forged. Well, that very relationship is the one that you duplicate exactly when you have kids. Now, what information do you have when you start to parent? When you had your kids, did anyone at the hospital go, all right, well, here's a manual we hand out. It's going to tell you how to be emotionally present and connected and how, don't be reactive and you're not going to lose your temper. That's on page 7. Okay, so just consult that. I didn't get that manual. So we are, here's this little life. Here we are in our false self, in all its manifestations, being handed, in this little baby, a true self. And sort of asked, all right, do your best. What are we going to resort to? I mean, I like engagement, so I'm going to open this up a little bit. What did you have to go by when you were learning to parent? That's right. Yeah. And maybe you read books. Maybe you had other examples, like other families you looked to, right? But at the level of like marrow deep, the lesson, the manual that was ingrained in you was your mom and your dad or whatever caretaker you experienced. I've spent much, I've got a decade logged in parenting. Most of my parenting has been me. It's been joyful and beautiful and all the things, right? But if I'm just thinking about areas that need growth, most of my parenting has been me going, oh, that's my mom, or that's dad. And that's again, blameless inventory. That's not to blame. That's simply to say, yeah, I don't love them. Don't necessarily want to parent that way. I want to handle this a bit differently. I want to be a little more gentle or a little more conversational or a little more, I don't want quite as much, just do it. Or I want emotions. Here's the one, we can all connect on this level, even people, again, who are like, the best parents in the world. Even the best parents in the world. Oftentimes in a family system, because it's not just, so family system work is really, really fascinating because it's not just who your mom is or just think about yourself. It's not just who you are, and it's not just who your spouse is or who your mom or your dad. It's who they are together that creates the environment, right? So a lot of families fall apart, and a lot of divorces happen not necessarily because the two people, it's fascinating and sad all at the same time. Not because the couple can't get along, but because the parts of them that show up when they engage in parenting is so like, I don't like that part about you. There's a part of you that shows up with our kids that I didn't know before. I didn't have an occasion to know. I didn't see this part of you. And I'm having a hard time relating to that. And that can become so large, right? So it's not just this is what makes it so complicated. It's not just who I am as Corey, it's who I am when my kids trigger me, right? It's who I am when parts of them knock on parts of me. So we'll talk about here in a second, like what makes parenting from the true self, what qualifies it partly as being very aware of how their feelings open up or trigger your feelings, okay? Huge. But one thing we can all, even if you have wonderful parents, one thing it resonates, we can all connect with one another on is feelings probably weren't talked about the way they should have been in your family of origin. I've never known a person, ever, who said, oh, my dad would come home from work and say, I feel shame today. Like, that probably didn't happen. Or mom would rage and then have the self-awareness to go, you know what, I'm feeling some fear, and that's what that was. Like, I'm sorry. That probably just didn't happen, right? We saw our parents' feelings from their behavior rather than them saying, that's sadness. That's what that is. Like, we just weren't privy to, right? They had never done that work. And it is work to come to that kind of self-awareness. So here's another example, a story of just what kind of stuff goes on unconsciously. I was part of this group one time, and this mom, I think she had a 2-year-old. And she was a very successful CEO until she had a kid. And her husband agreed, like, I'm going to stay home with the baby. Very successful, very intelligent woman. Here she is now raising her little baby. And this guy who was kind of leading this group, she said, I got a question. He was talking about rage and fear being what produces rage. Rage isn't actually a manifestation of anger. It's actually fear. And she said, okay, I got a question. She goes, my little kid, in the high chair, bowl of cereal every day, this boy tosses that cereal on the ground, and I want to lose it. Like, I just fly off the handle. How is that fear? Like, I'm just mad. I've got a rage problem. And he goes, no, you got a fear problem. And she goes, what am I scared of? Right? My baby's throwing cereal on the ground. Where's the fear? And he said, what did you do again before you? I was CEO of this company, blah, 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 blah. And she said, or he said, chances are you're very afraid this is all your life has become now. Right? Here you were. Everyone turned to you. You were a person of great importance. And now, have you grieved that? And have you come to terms with the fact that you don't know what your future is? And as much as you love your baby, for you as a person, your life has kind of been reduced to diapers and cereal being thrown on the floor. And she just wept. I mean, he nailed it, right? Most of us did not come up in homes where that was that kind of self-awareness, where I could say, oh, I'm feeling fear right now, and that's causing me to lose my stuff when my kid throws right? So we all experience a level of disconnection. So here we are, formed by disconnection, being given little babies that we've got to connect to. So we're just ill-equipped. So let's talk about what it means in our remaining time to parent from the true self. What has to happen, okay? One of the first things that has to happen is there's got to be an awareness. I just mentioned this, but there's got to be an awareness, if we're just getting practical, of how your child, it doesn't matter what age, they could be 30 or 3, how your child's feelings trigger your feelings, how their feelings and their actions work on you. We've all known what it is to, like, you be in a place of total serenity. You just feel right with the world, right? And then your kid will say or do something, and you are dysregulated, right? You are reactive. You are frustrated. Are you aware of why what they're doing or what they're saying or how they're acting is acting in you a certain way? I've done enough work on myself where I don't always practice what I preach, but I'm far enough along to be able to stop and go, okay, what is this? I can notice when, I could mention a million examples here, but one is when, I got 4 little ones, right? I'm okay being, like, hearing daddy and that being followed by a question. I'm okay with that 5 times, maybe. I'm not okay with that 15 times. Like, that becomes, I can just feel my nervous system started to activate, right? Daddy this, daddy that, daddy this, daddy that. Now, saying it right now, I could be like, you know what, I'm so grateful that I actually have kids that are connected with me and calling me, asking me questions, all that. But in the moment, Why is that so triggering for me? What is it? They're not even fighting or protesting or whatever else. They're just asking me neutral questions, right? What is it that's going on in me that doesn't just go, I'll gladly answer these questions, right? That's what I'm talking about. Do you know why, whatever it is, and your kid has an ability to push a button in you, right? Different than your spouse, interestingly enough. Like there'll be some things that your spouse is, I'm okay with, that you are not, and vice versa. Are you self-aware enough to know what's going on you and why? And I can tell you why. For me, I grew up in a home where questions were usually posed with an air of suspicion and accusation. That was kind of my formation. If there was going to be a question asked of me, it was probably because I had not done something well enough. So it wasn't a neutral question. It was a loaded question. And the question was going to come there was a price tag on that question. I still, to this day, if I get bombarded with a lot of questions, I start to feel defensive. The feeling that comes up in me, even with my babies, is defensiveness. Almost like I'm being asked a lot of, as if I have got to give an answer or an explanation, like the spotlight's on me in some sort of way, as it was when I was a kid. That's still in me. I've worked through quite a bit of it, but it's still in me. So I can handle a few questions. When I start to get drilled by my kids, right, I feel that defensive-ness in me. I just want to sort of close off and just, I want the questions to stop, right? So are you self-aware enough to know why? Because it's not insightful enough just to be like, well, that's aggravating to me. Yeah, but why, right? And here's a premise sort of smuggled into this point. Every feeling you have and every feeling someone, quote unquote, gives you is a bit like a messenger. It's like someone, it's UPS knocking on your door saying, I've got a package for you. It's meant to give you valuable data. Keep this in mind too with your kids, no one can truly give you a feeling. All right, you can't make me feel anything. You can do things that are predictably going to cause some feelings, but you can't you can't implant sadness in me or fear in me. You may, again, do things that are going to, probably 100% chance, elicit those things. But if I started doing this, and you had to sit here for the next hour, listen to this. I'm not entering in your mind and heart, making you feel that aggravation. There's something about this that is causing something in you. Same thing when our kids ask of us or protest or act out or whatever. So that becomes a bit of a messenger, like what's going on in you that you're having this emotional response to their emotions, right? Attaching to the true self is being self-aware enough to know how my feelings operate in me. I've got to return to a sense of self-awareness and self-trueness to be like, you know what, that gives me a lot of fear, or that makes me feel shame, or for whatever reason that hits my anger button, and being able to know that. And that leads to my second point. Parenting from the true self, trueness to self, means differentiation. One of the greatest problems I see in family systems, and I'll tell you this, if it's not taken care of when your kids are younger than, when it's not taken care of when your kids are younger than 10, it will show up when your kids are over 20. Like it won't go away, is enmeshment. Another way we say this is codependency. We've all heard the term codependency, right? It's a term we kind of throw around. What would you say, I'm curious, what definition would you give to codependency? How would you define it? No wrong answers. Yep, definitely part of it. Yep. Yes. Here's my favorite definition of codependency. Now, when I say this, it's going to hit because you're guilty of it and I'm guilty of it. Codependency is this. That's all. Everything you said's all right. I'm not okay unless you're okay. That's codependency. I'm not okay unless you're okay. If something's off in you, I'm so unhealthily, non-independently attached that something's going to be off in me. And I just can't stand for you to have feelings. Because if you have feelings, I'm going to have feelings. And I don't like the feelings that are coming up in me, so I'd rather you not have feelings. Or I would rather you have happy feelings, right? Because when you have sadness or fear or anger, I'm so enmeshed with you that that's going to mean I've got to do something. That's what codependency says, right? Differentiation is what we want. And we don't want independence. Independence is like, codependence is like, I'm going to hug this podium. Independence is I'm just going to walk away. We don't want that, right? We want interdependence. I am not this podium. I can touch it, right? We're separate, but we're in relationship, right? True self cannot live in an enmeshed, codependent system because true self requires autonomy. I've got to be able to say who I am, what I like, what I desire, what my preferences are. I've got to be in touch with my anger. A lot of people really struggle to be in touch with their own anger. They don't know how to be angry in a healthy way. I mean, we're told biblically, right? You can be angry and what? Sin not. There's healthy anger. A lot of people don't know how to feel sadness and grieve. They've got this kind of Pollyannic view that everything's got to be sort of just, optimistically. Sadness is a vital part of your emotional health. But can I feel these things without freaking out, worrying about you spiraling when I'm sad or angry? Do we have enough interdependence for me to have room? And can I give you room? You may be upset with me. I can still be secure in this. It's still okay, right? I'm not going anywhere. You can be sad. Okay, I don't have to make you feel better because your sadness makes me feel weird. I can just let you be sad. I'm here. Do you need anything? Okay? Differentiation is the only environment in which true self can flourish. Otherwise, we go back to the performative personalities, the codependent personalities that say, I've got to be whatever it is you want me to be. So you need to be able to understand how your child's feelings bring up feelings in you. And then you've got to remember, you're still a person. You're not a parent first, person second, right? You are, whatever your name is, first, and parenting is a part of you. I've got to be, same thing with your marriage. I'm not a spouse first, right? I'm a person first, and there's got to be healthy differentiation here. It's only when, there's a quote by, my favorite poet is Rainer Maria Rilke, and he says that it's the job of love to protect the solitude of one another. Like, that's a beautiful idea. The job of love is not to consume you or to be consumed by you. It's to protect the solitude of you, right? It's only when we are two wholes that we can come together in a true union. Another aspect of true self, and this is hard for me. This is one that I do struggle with. It's very much a work in progress for me, is true self plays. True self likes to play. True self is inner child. What do children like to do? They like to play. I tend to lean, because of my own childhood, more on the melancholic side. We're all typically wired either anxiously or depressively. We kind of go one way. You can be both, but I will always default toward the depressive side. It's just how I'm wired. So play for me is, I do it, but it takes work. It takes work to play. I can kind of kick into this responsibility dad mode, and let's just make sure everything's, as dutiful as a parent needs to be, as important as responsibility is, all that stuff, your true self, your inner child, still needs play. I was doing some intensive work on myself a couple of years ago, and it was heavily around inner child work. And part of it was reconnecting to my little self, to the point of like finding a picture of my 8-year-old self and talking to him. Like, what do I want him to know? Have I built a relationship with him? And, it was very emotional doing this group work, and one of the lead therapists said, he goes, man, have your kids met 8-year-old you? And that question broke me. Have my kids met little me? And the answer was no. Like, my kids met adult me. They met get your butt in the car, let's go to school me, right? They met hurry up, do your homework me. They met I'm going to take care of, but they hadn't met a lot of little me that likes to play. True self plays. So if you have a hard time celebrating and playing, let that be a bit of like a check engine light. Something's going on there, okay? not saying you got to be just, jovial and fun all the time. But you've got to be able to, I think it's really important to be able to tap into play. Can I set aside the overly responsible parts of me just to have fun with my kids? Just to be able to connect with them at the level of play. They're still kids. They need play. And when I, talking about repeating the class that we learned in childhood, if I don't give them that gift, what do you think they're going to do when they have kids? They're going to have a hard time playing with them. I remember one of the, it occurred to me as I was doing some work on myself, one of the saddest aspects of my childhood is I used to like love to play with like little superheroes and action figures and cars and things, and I would be on the floor, right? And I can remember this image of my parents, so I'm on the floor laying down, so my eye level is that. I can remember my parents' feet passing over me, but never stopping to play with me. Like they just would leave me to it, right? It would have meant a lot for them to stop, get down on the floor with me and play. That never happened. So I have to be compassionate with myself, like, why is play a struggle for me? Well, duh, right? It was never modeled for me. But true self plays. True self plays. So just kind of recap. True self, inner child. I wish we had more time. We could go deep into that. But true self, inner child, the same. You got to first learn what it means to reconnect to that little you. Forge relationship, cultivate relationship with that little you. From that, be aware of how you feel when they feel, when your kids feel. Is there room, right? Differentiated room for them to feel and you to feel. Listen, my kids don't need to experience me just taking care of their feelings. My kids need to hear me say sometimes, like, I'm tired, man. Like, I'm worn out. Like, I'm stressed. Like, I've had feelings too. It's not the job of a parent to stuff or suppress all their feelings. That's going to only teach them to do that. I wish my mom and dad had said, I'm feeling some guilt right now. Honestly, I'm struggling. Or I feel hurt. That really hurt me. I never heard that. So I never had language for it. So behavior, we always manifest feelings in our behavior, but that's not enough. I need to know what's going on. If you don't learn how to express your feelings with your mouth, it will come out in your actions, and usually not in a healthy way. So can we make room for one another to have play, feelings? And then third thing, again, can you play? Can you let your inner child out? Can your 7 or 8 or 4 or 6-year-old self play with your kids? And if you can't, if that's a struggle, let the difficulty or the challenge of that, the struggle of that, be an indicator that there's some work that needs to be done. Like, there's some work that needs to be done. The greatest gift I can give my kids is me working on me, right? The more work I do on me, the better human, healthier, more integrated, more aligned, more self-aware human I am. I can't think of there's no other provision or good or gift I can give them than a healthier version of me. That's it. Thanks. I got maybe 2 minutes. Any questions or anything?
What would you say is the best first step for discovering or uncovering
Your inner child, true self? I do think it's really practical is if you could find a picture of yourself as a little girl, and then make it visible. Put it in your bathroom, carry it with you, and then start looking at it. It feels awkward at first. Start looking at it and kind of talking to her. What does she need? What does she want? She's not gone, right? So what does she want today? What do you feel when you look at her? What would she say to you? Start creating relationship very practically. And I know it sounds silly, but I'm a big believer in tangibilizing this. So the people I work with a lot of times when we get to the stage, I'm like, you need to find a stuffed animal. Like you need a tangible, you could keep it wherever you want to keep it, but you need to know, just as a visual reminder, that little you is there. You've got to care for her. So you almost have to make this unconscious thing or this, abstract thing tangible. See, touch, connect to, and then the daily practice of, and I certainly don't, I struggle all the time, but as often as you can, practice of being in conversation with her. You will feel the difference. Things will happen in you. Like, it is a powerful thing when you just spend 5 minutes looking at a picture of you as a little girl, a little boy, and like, hey, what was it like for you? What did you feel? What did you need that you didn't get? It's emotional. So little things like that, I think. Any other questions? All right. Good to be with y'all. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah.